Good evening, everybody. Welcome inside the Villanova Basketball Report. It is live here on Bob Long Sports. My name is Bob Long, but again, I cannot do this alone. Here is my crew. Kevin Long, Tom Trainer alongside K-Mac, not yet back from his fishing trip. Might be ice fishing at this point, at least up here in the Northeast. We welcome him back hopefully next week. But guys, a tough week for Villanova basketball. We were imploring the Wildcats to blow somebody out last week. They did that. They blew out Marquette. Then they went and got blown out themselves against Creighton, the team that looks like a two-horse race now at the top of the Big East. And Villanova had a chance to really stamp their way towards another relatively uncontested Big East title. That is clearly not the case now. And it sets up what should be an interesting final 25 days of the season. So to each of you guys, quick around the horn thoughts on Villanova basketball as we sit here today on the 16th of February.
Yeah, so starting with the Marquette game earlier in the week, it was a really encouraging effort from the guys, really pulled away, especially late in that game. And I was really encouraged with the way that Jeremiah Robinson-Earl shot the three ball. I really have not seen that game from him yet this year, so that was really great to see. Guys will start to respect that a little bit more. That'll make the drive even more effective for him moving forward. And, moving on to the Creighton game, obviously not Villanova's best effort, but you got to tip the cap a little bit to Creighton with the way that they played. I mean, coming into this game, they were either 15-5, 14-5 on the year, had not played their best basketball yet, but I think we saw that on Sunday. It was definitely the best, most complete game that they've put together. Marcus Zagorowski looked like the guy that we thought we'd see coming into this year. Ballack couldn't miss a shot no matter where he was on the floor. The team just really picked up the pace to a point where Villanova was very uncomfortable. You could see that. It wasn't necessarily the turnover bug that got us this time, but it was all over the floor. So overall, I would say, not thrilled with the week, but I'm okay with where we are. I think that this team has a little ways to go if we're going to be a title contender again here in March. But I think that the pieces are there right now. I'm not ready to write this season off based off of a one bad game versus Creighton.
I agree, Kev. Sometimes you just get outplayed. And Creighton is probably one of two or three teams in the Big East that has fans in the arena. And we know the fans in Omaha love their Creighton basketball, so that adds another variable that Villanova hasn't really been used to yet or faced yet this season. And sometimes you just get outplayed. I think, as you said, Kev, Villanova played their most possibly, one of their most complete games of the season against Marquette. And then on Saturday, faces Creighton and possibly Creighton's most complete game of the season thus far. And that's just, how the cookie crumbles, as a great newsman once said, and from one of your favorite cities. And so that's just how it plays out sometimes. And again, no cause for concern. I think Creighton just had a really good game on Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, Bruce Almighty, love the reference. Of course, our buddy Steve Carell got his start, maybe not his start, but had a hell of a role in that as well. But yes, I think those are good thoughts. Listen, Creighton played as good a game of basketball, most complete game of basketball, arguably that I've seen in college basketball this year. I think you could say that Gonzaga played a couple of very complete games this year as well. Baylor has played some very complete games this year, but Creighton, that particular effort, no one's going to call them the most complete team in the country, or I should say the most consistent team in the country. But they can play a full 40 minutes of basketball, I think, as well as anybody, and that's what we saw on over the weekend. So we'll take that as we will and move now into a series of questions that are essentially burning in the hearts and minds of Villanova basketball fans. That's tonight's opening tip. All right, so our first question here on the opening tip is in line with the question and really some of the comments we just asked. Who's really the better team, Creighton or Villanova? Put each of them in their best performance on their best day. Who's the better team? What was Saturday emblematic of, or was it really not a true look at who's the better team?
I think they're pretty evenly matched. I think both teams have a lot of weapons, especially around the perimeter. But both teams are, so I would say both teams are very strong offensive teams and are okay defensive teams. And I think in some cases it's who's got the hotter hand on that given night. I really do think that's the case. It is a little perplexing when you look and you see that Creighton has 5 losses in the Big East Conference. And you look at some of the teams they lost to, some games at home in Omaha, which we just spoke about as a strength for them. And so that's a little perplexing. However, I think when you see these teams in the head-to-head matchup on Saturday, they look pretty evenly matched. And I think one thing that we don't talk a lot or don't talk often enough about when it comes to Villanova basketball is post play, especially interior defensive play. And I think we saw it again on Saturday. I think we've seen it a few times this year. And I know JRE does so many wonderful things, and we don't like to talk bad about it. But he has had his lunch stolen several times this year by big men on opposing teams. And Bishop did that again to him this past Saturday. I think that is something that Villanova basketball needs to figure out. I think that is, from what I can see, something that separates these two teams, or at least separated them on Saturday, was the post play of Bishop doing virtually whatever he wanted versus JRE. But then also, Bob, one of your old and most favorite problems with Villanova is guarding the simple pick and roll.
Yep, there you
Still
go.
something
right?
that this Villanova basketball team struggles to do.
Yeah, because it's partially a JRE issue, but again, they're not communicating well enough. They're not making the right decisions. And I'll give Marcus Zegarowski a lot of credit, and I'll also give the broadcast crew, Nick Bahe as well as Tim Brando, a lot of credit. They recognized that it was Marcus Zegarowski taking what the defense gives him, and basically it was stated on the broadcast, and appropriately so, that once you run that same look at Zegarowski a couple of times, he's going to take advantage of it. So if it's a flash from that off-ball defender on that pick and roll, then all of a sudden you have 2 on Zegarowski for just enough time for Bishop to slip, throw the lob. If you have to try to have the first defender fight through the screen and the second is going to stay on the big man, then Zegarowski can take it to the hole. If that happens and then a help side defender then crashes, then he finds Mitch Ballack wide open. So, yes, I think it's something that Villanova needs to get better at and always has struggled with to some extent. However, you're also looking at one of the best offensive teams in the country. And one of the reasons they're one of the best offensive teams in the country is because they do that thing very well. So my answer to the question is actually I think Creighton's ceiling is higher than Villanova's. And that's something I would have said and did say at the beginning of the year as well. They are senior laden. They are super experienced with Ballack and Zegarowski. Bishop has come into his role very, very well. This is a really good basketball team. And it left me scratching my head more so when they struggled against the Providences of the world than it surprises me when they blow out a team like Villanova. I think Villanova is one of the most consistent teams in the country, as we'll get to, and we've talked about this year. But just like I said last week, I am begging this team to blow more teams out. And I'm wondering if it's because, in part, I just don't know what the ceiling of this team is relative to Creighton. I'm not saying they're not a top 15 team in the country every day of the week. I'm not saying they can't make the Elite Eight. But Creighton's a team that, and we said it in the pregame or pre-season podcast, that Creighton on any given night might be the best team in the country. You can go back to our second episode, I believe we were talking about that. I think that's the case on what we saw this past weekend.
Yeah, I think you're right in saying that, Bob. If Creighton plays the way that they did, like they did over the weekend, they'll end up in the Final Four. There's really no doubt about it. They look incredible, but can they put together that kind of consistent effort over a long period of time? And to go back to the question, I see it as a very, very even matchup, to be honest. And obviously you want to pick a side here, but you look at these teams, like you said, both very upperclassmen heavy. They have most of these teams really both 5 men deep, have a little bit of a bench to work with, but you got your 5 starters who all average double-digit points, and then there's a pretty big fall-off when you go to your bench after that. Really great guard play, right? We have Justin Moore and we have Gillespie. They have Zagorowski. They have Ballack. They have Bishop, plays fairly similar to the way that JRE plays. I see this as a pretty even battle. I think if you match these teams up 10 times, I think you're going to get an even split 5-5. Creighton got the better one of that matchup there. I think that they were coming out ready to play. If I'm not mistaken, the top 16 had just come out for the first time just before that game, and Creighton found themselves just outside, and maybe they had a little bit of extra motivation there. They certainly came out with more energy. Their game is definitely more so the up-tempo to Villanova's half-court style, which they were able to execute and impose their will. So I'm really intrigued to see how this is going to end up when I think it was March 3rd when they play again. But I think these teams are in a really dead even heat. Obviously, both very well coached at this point. I think these teams are very, very similar right now.
Yeah, the other 2 guys we didn't mention were Mahoney and Jefferson, both of whom are really good small forward type guys that can slash to the hoop, guys that can shoot. It's just 5 guys you got to defend in space at any given time. That's what most impressed me. With that said, right, let's go on to our next question here, because Creighton played so well, sure. Villanova didn't quite play as well. I actually thought the first half was a fairly complete half for Villanova. I thought they played decently well, but missed 4 point-blank layups. Marginal contest, but layups you need to make 90% of the time. So when Villanova doesn't get its best play from Collin, Gillespie, and Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, and that's what we saw on Saturday, right? What's the ceiling of this Villanova team overall? Sure, but let's talk about that, right? Is this a deep team, or is this a team that is dependent upon Gillespie and Robinson-Earl to truly outwork and kind of go on the plus side, a plus-minus against their opponents?
Well, I would say that this team is not going to go very far without those 2. I think if both of those guys put up a game where if they don't have it together, they won't make it out of the first weekend. I think these guys, they need to bring their stuff. You just look at the rest of the lineup. Jermaine Samuels is not going to handle the bulk of the duty. Although he has scored a lot of points over the past week, he does not know how to facilitate the ball. He can't run an offense. I think the next guy that maybe would be Justin Moore. And although he has put up some good numbers, I've honestly been a little frustrated with the way that he plays the game. And as we like to say, gets a little triangular. He has a little bit of Phil Booth in him out there, and you see him dribble himself into a corner, or, even if he's not in trouble, sometimes it's all of a sudden the shot clock's down to 5 and he's still got the ball. He hasn't given it up yet. So I don't know that I trust him to facilitate the offense if Collin doesn't have it. And, Caleb Daniels, I don't think he's necessarily at that point where he can facilitate this offense. So we especially need Collin Gillespie to be there every single night. And it certainly helps when Jeremiah Robinson-Earl brings his A game as well.
Yeah, I think, by the way, let's talk about Caleb Daniels just for a second. I think the book is out on him at this point, and that's not to say that he can't make an adjustment over the last 25 days of the regular season here. He certainly can. He's good enough, but I kind of think the book is out a little bit. He's not shooting the ball quite as well. I think opponents know that he is really only comfortable dribbling with the right hand and attacking to the right. I think opponents are realizing that he does get a little bit loose with the off arm. He's also a big, strong guy, perhaps does not get the benefit of the doubt there. Way too many player control fouls on Caleb Daniels. I think for Villanova to really get to that point, what they will need, in addition to Collin Gillespie and Jeremiah Robinson-Earl playing very well, is for Caleb Daniels to really be that third or fourth scorer and the guy who you can count on to get a few key rebounds, defend pretty well, but more importantly, to be able to hit that wing 3. That's going to be huge for Villanova. And I think also allows Collin Gillespie and Jeremiah Robinson-Earl to play better in space. If Daniels can be that dynamite three-point shooter to oppose a Cole Swider or to be the antithesis of Jermaine Samuels, mind you, who can slash to the basket. That's how this offense runs. So I'm glad you brought up Daniels, Kevin. I think he's very important to the success of this team.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I think looking offensively, we've been mostly talking about offensively so far. This team is only going to go as far as Collin Gillespie takes them. I'm not saying that it's only on his shoulders, but if you look at, two of the games they lost, and even the third game, really, even though he had an outstanding scoring and shooting effort in that Virginia Tech game, and also that was so long ago at this point. If you look at the more recent games against St. John's and Creighton, I mean, Collin Gillespie in single-digit scoring, 3 assists, a couple of turnovers. The Villanova's best games have been games where Collin Gillespie, he might not have his best shooting night. He might score 14, 15 points, but they're the games where he has 6, 7, even 11 assists against Marquette, and when he's not turning the ball over. When your floor general when he's on and he's moving the ball and he's quarterbacking the offense and taking care of the basketball, that's everything starts from there, and everything starts with him offensively. Even with that said, and you mentioned, Bob, we're waiting on another piece. Jermaine Samuels has been that other piece, but we know he's not consistent enough to rely on him as the third option. That's important. The bigger issue with this team is defensively.
Totally, 100%.
And I don't know what the problem is. I mean, you look at their efficiency ratings, and they are tanking. I mean, it's looking like a recession in the stock market. Watching their defensive efficiency numbers tank over the past few weeks, where their offensive numbers have been pretty consistent. I mean, and even against Creighton, they score 70 points. It's not their best. That's not their average, but that's not terrible. It's the giving up 86 points to a good offensive team. But there's something about this team I said in the beginning of the year. Now, I know it's tough to compare any team to those 2016, 2008 teams because they were tough teams. Like, they were as tough of a group of individuals and has tough leaders, hard-nosed leaders on those teams as you'll find on any team ever. But this team just defensively lacks a certain level of toughness. I don't see the frenetic hands, arms at times, and discipline. We could talk about pick and roll defense all day long, and I think it also becomes a depth issue because inevitably when you have to put a Cole Swider on the floor, when you put a Brandon Slater on, when you put an Eric Dixon on the floor, things fall apart.
God help us. Yeah, I mean,
things fall apart, and so we can talk about offense all night long, but offense really isn't the problem. The problem with this team is defense. Yeah. And I said the offense will go as far as Collin Gillespie goes. Well, this team overall will go as far as their defense goes.
Right. Yeah. And you talk about the defensive efficiency looking like a recession. All we need is the entire Nova Nation to come here and buy up the stock, right? Because there's a short sale by Creighton and some other Big East hedge funds here. We need to buy it up, right? Unlimited losses. For
link it up, Robin Hood.
Come on, let's make it happen.
Well, the one thing I'll say though is when they went to a zone defense against Creighton, I thought they actually looked a little better. I don't think they stuck with it for too long, but I was encouraged by that.
That was a desperation move, right? And I agree that that they kind of stopped the bleeding. I don't see that being something they're going to go to when the game is. I guess when they're at their normal comfort level or the game isn't getting away from them. And I agree with you. Maybe it is something where this set of personnel might be better in the zone, but I saw that as a desperation move, but keep going.
Yeah, I think they're going to need to be prepared to do that in the event that there is foul trouble. If you get into a game in March and Robinson-Earl is in foul trouble, and if you're forced to play Dixon or Swider extensive minutes, I think you got to go back to the zone. I think that's really the only way that they can be effective on defense. And Jay is just realizing that now, and he's trying to do whatever he can to get his guys ready for March.
The only interesting thing there is I just don't remember a time where, I guess the 2016 team, they needed to go to it a few times, even did so in the national championship game against North Carolina, but It's not their bread and butter. Even when they did go to the zone, yes, at times they got a few stops, but Creighton was able to get to the ball to the center of that zone way too easily. And at that point, have to collapse. That opens up shots in rhythm for three-point shooters. That really takes the zone out of its effectiveness. And again, if they're going to go to zone, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. But again, that's a concern. And Tom, you said about, effort and toughness. Certainly that 2016 team, as much as any team I can remember, had that type of toughness. But I still think the effort is there. I think it's more like you said. It's more about the discipline. It's more about being in the right spots at the right time. Collin Gillespie rushes back down the floor after missing not one but two layups and pokes the ball from behind. I think we're still seeing plenty of that. I still think we're seeing a lot of active trying to team rebound. It's positioning and defensive scheme and those specific issues that I think are causing this defense to go through quite a lull here. And yeah, in some ways it does link up with when they came back from COVID pause. I'm not blaming it on that, but it does kind of link up timing wise there. So I think both of you are right in that the defense is going to be a key part of what this team does going forward. I didn't think the offense was awful against Creighton. It was just trying to keep up with a defense, with an opposing offense when the defense could not get stops. So with that said, knowing what you know right now, knowing the schedule ahead of Villanova, and knowing all of the both successes and deficiencies of this team, does Villanova look like a 2 seed to you right now? And where do you see them going realistically in the NCAA tournament?
I would say no at this point. I think that we've seen enough flaws to say that I'm not sure that this team is a 2 seed right now. We certainly have a good win over Texas where we can say, they're sitting on the 3-4 line right now, and maybe that propels us into that spot. And, maybe there aren't a whole lot of teams that are knocking down the door to necessarily take that 2 seed away from us. There's been a lot of fluctuation over the past couple of weeks, but when I think of a 2 seed, you think of a 2016 team, and then maybe that's not the right comparison to make. It's a whole different year. It's a whole different college basketball landscape. We have, like we talked about last week, a lot of the normal blue bloods who aren't there this year, who aren't knocking down the door for those 1 and 2 seeds. So I think we maybe could end up in that situation. I think that we could easily finish the rest of this Big East season with only maybe one more loss, and maybe we either make a deep run in the Big East tournament or could certainly win it. I don't necessarily see a whole lot of teams other than Creighton who have challenged Villanova a whole lot. But I would just say that right now it doesn't feel like they're as strong as they have been in years past when they've been vying for a top seed. But do they get there at the end of the day? They probably will, just because of the state of college basketball right now and just their remaining schedule and the games that they missed, honestly, over the first half of the season.
Sure. Yeah, I think they are. I think they're probably back end 2 seed right now, early 3 seed. I think what's really important is this UConn game on Saturday of next week, because you have a chance to kind of really stymie some of the regression here. They're 2-2 in their last 4. UConn's a huge game because they're hanging on the fringes of that Big East title race. Not really, they're 4th, but it's an important game, huge game for UConn. First time seeing Villanova back in the Big East. If Villanova can take care of business there, then they're going to play St. John's at home. I think they'll learn from that first game and take down St. John. Then they play Butler. They have their last game of the season against Providence, and the penultimate game is Creighton at home. Again, does it matter? Not as much this year. But that penultimate game against Creighton, in many of these models, if you're modeling it out, I think that determines your Big East regular season champion, that game right there. So, again, we're talking about this team, and the lens through which we were looking at that entire first half of the discussion, as far as I'm concerned, is, hey, comparing it to Creighton, who Kevin, you said it, right? They're a Final Four caliber team. And if they can play with that type of consistency, they can beat anybody in the country. So we're talking about Villanova in that lens, but I still believe that they are a top 10 team, even right now, even the way they played against Creighton. And what happens against UConn is going to be really, I think, a big determinant of what the final 3 weeks of the season are going to look like and what type of momentum, if any, they have going into the Big East tournament and then the NCAA tournament in Indiana.
Yeah, I think the first question, I think, is an easier answer. I think it's more likely than not that Villanova ends up being a top 2 seed. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they could still earn a 1 seed. I mean, Kevin's right. I foresee Villanova losing 1, maybe 2 games at most in the remainder of their schedule. I think they're still the favorite to win the Big East tournament. If they do that, I think they're knocking on the door for a 1 seed. And now here we are thinking, are they even going to be a 2 seed? So I think more likely than not, they will be a top 2 seed. The question of, are they top 2 seed caliber? That's a little more nuance there. I mean, obviously, prisoner of the moment tells me no, they don't look like a top 8 basketball team in the country. We've been waiting for them to blow teams out. They blew out finally Marquette last week, but they still don't look like a dominant basketball team. If you're supposed to be a top 2 seed, you're supposed to be one of the more dominant basketball teams in the country. And a lot of time I watch them and they're not that. However, think about their losses. They've lost to 2 top 25 teams. They have a great win over Texas. And their other losses is St. John's team, who is probably going to make the tournament. So, I mean, all of their losses are to tournament caliber teams, including 2 teams that are top 4 seed caliber. So, I mean, where they've faltered, I mean, are good places to falter, if there is such a thing, and then they've taken care of business otherwise. So, I would say yes, they are a top 8 caliber team, especially when this year there have been a lot of surprises.
Well, let's do that, right? Let's just talk about it. Are they better than Gonzaga? This is no. Kevin, you can answer too. Are they better than Baylor? No, right? No. They're not. Now here's where it gets interesting. Are they better than Michigan? Let's just say no, but come on. I mean, they're 14-1. They haven't played a ton of games. They have looked good at times, but they've also had some games where you've scratched their head as to why it's taken so long for them to take care of business in the Big Ten. Are they better than Ohio State, 17-4? That team's playing pretty good right now. I'll give them some credit. But they started the year not as well. Let's just say no, right? Let's just say those 4 teams are better than Villanova, quote unquote. Are they better than Illinois, 14-5? Now, I think they'd have a lot of problems guarding Coburn inside for the same reasons that they've had trouble guarding Georgetown's bigs, Creighton's big. But are they better than Illinois? They might be better than Illinois. Are they better than Houston, 17-2? I think they're better than Houston. You guys can jump in any time on these, but
I would agree on the Houston. I think we're probably somewhere like around that Illinois-Ohio State line.
Are they better than UVA?
See, I think it's a toss-up. Michigan down. Michigan to Texas is a toss-up right now. If you look at those rankings, I think 3 through 12 is a total toss-up right now.
Yep.
And the ACC outside of Virginia is nowhere to be seen, which shows you how weird of a year this is.
Right. So, yes, they are, right? I mean, Loyola Chicago is number 22 in the country with 4 losses out of that conference. No disrespect, but 4 losses. Wisconsin is number 21 in the country with 7 losses. 7.
Just lost to Drake after Drake lost their best player, too.
Yeah.
So, an unimpressive loss there.
Yeah.
Right.
So, again, and I know Villanova has 3 losses, and they had a pause. Don't get me wrong there. I understand that. But Southern Cal at number 17. I get that Virginia Tech beat them, but Virginia Tech, I don't know.
I guess, Bob, it becomes the question of, right, as a Villanova fan, so inside the Villanova bubble, you watch this 2020-2021 team play. Are they better than last year's team? Yes. Better than the team the year before? Yes. Better than 2018? Absolutely not. Better than 2017? No. Better than 2016? No. Better than 2015? No. Better than 2014? Probably not.
Yeah,
So
that 2014 is interesting.
In terms of Villanova basketball teams,
yeah.
Again, I said probably not. I mean, Villanova, in terms of where Villanova basketball teams in the past 5-6 years, where this team falls, most of those teams are better than this team. At least when I watch them, sit and watch them play and compare. But when you look at the picture of this season, it shows a very, very different story.
I also don't know that this team is any better than last year's team. I know a lot of guys are getting a year older, but Saddiq Bey was an All-American. Who is that guy this year? I guess Robinson-Earl, but Saddiq Bey is better than Robinson-Earl is last year relative to this year. And that team was – it's funny. Everyone likes to say they were playing so well, and they did have some good games down the stretch, and they were going to be a 3, maybe a 2 seed, right? We're having the same discussion. But again, they had to beat Georgetown on a Jermaine Samuels, goaltend, and who the heck knows, right? There were a lot of games last year. This team feels very similar to last year's, and I think is on par with that 2014 team. Actually, that was a 2 seed and lost in Buffalo to UConn.
I think it's hard for Villanova fans to swallow this Creighton pill. I can't remember a time in recent years when I've watched the team this late in the season get dominated, and really they were just not as athletic as Creighton. And I think that was just a shock to the system to see a team play that much better than us. I mean, I think we saw it, I think it was last year when we played Michigan early at home, and we were just absolutely outmanned by them. And obviously we got better as the year went on, but Jay Wright generally gets his team going by now. Again, we had a 3-week layoff, so that's part of it too. But I think it was just a shock to watch this game and say, this team looks better than us by the eye test. Yes, they had their best game of the year. I get that, and we didn't necessarily do that. But it just felt like we didn't have the talent, and it looked like Creighton was one of those top teams in the nation, even though they've stumbled a few times themselves.
Now, I know we got to move on to our other topics. Bob just segued to with Mr. Bey mentioned a minute ago, but I think that this Creighton team reminds me of 2015 to 2017 Xavier.
Yeah,
I think there were a few times we lost at Xavier in pretty convincing fashion. Maybe not double digits, but pretty darn convincing fashion, enough so that you could look at that Xavier basketball team and say, yeah, they look like they're possibly better than Villanova is. And that's how I kind of look at this Creighton team. I think their team, like that Xavier team, that probably will make it to the second weekend of the tournament and have a shot to go to the Final Four. Who knows if they will? But I don't know if this Creighton team, Kevin, is the first time I've seen a Big East team play Villanova and say, wow, they might be better than Villanova. I think those Xavier teams were pretty darn good. But I think that this Creighton team is certainly maybe the only team to match that.
Yeah. Last point, right? 2018, that last game at the Cintas Center was one of the final games of the regular season. And Xavier played really well. I mean, they shot pretty good basketball. They hit a lot of tough shots. But that was just a game, and that might have been one of those 17, 18, or 19 three-point field goal games for Villanova. And there was a shot I remember in particular, Mikal Bridges coming off a screen, end of the shot clock, way deep at the top of the key, barely even set his feet, hit a 3. It was just one of those nights where you felt like, wow, Chris Mack, hell of a coach. He may have even in some ways come to that game with a better game plan than Villanova. But Villanova just hit some unbelievable, ill-advised shots to win that game. And I don't think, as good as Caleb Daniels is from beyond the arc, even Cole Swider, he's not taking shots like that. He's taking feeder set, There's a little bit of space shots. Collin Gillespie, he's not taken those types of shots that even like this guy wasn't on the team, but like a Josh Hart or like a Mikal Bridges was able to take off balance. I just don't know if this team has that amount of talent, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that this team can't go to a Final Four, can't contest against any team in the country. It's just that what Villanova fans and what we are in this show now comparing Villanova to is probably the greatest basketball team not named. Remind me of the year 2012 Kentucky, Kid Gilchrist, Anthony Davis. I mean, in a long time. So we have to keep that in mind, that this is a team that's going to be a high seed in the tournament every year with the talent they're bringing in, have a chance to go deep in the tournament every year. But yes, this may not be on par with the greatest Villanova basketball team in program history. And you know what? That's okay as well. Any other questions, guys, before we move on to the next segment? Any burning questions that Nova Nation would like to have fleshed out? None. Hearing none, we move on now. Yield the rest of our time to the court. Kevin Long is up next with our Cat in the Wild.
All right, thanks, Bob. Tom kind of led into this one. I think this one was a no-brainer for Nova Nation paying attention to NBA basketball this week. Our Cat in the Wild is Saddiq Bey. Put up 30 points against the Celtics in 27 minutes, 10 of 12 from the field, including 7 of 7 from 3, 12 rebounds, just an unbelievable performance. And then even followed that up, got 38 minutes in the very next game, 16 points, 6 of 11, 4 of 8 from 3. Really impressive game from Saddiq, a guy who had a hot start in the NBA and then cooled off a little bit in December and into January. He's been averaging about 20 minutes a game so far this year, averaging 9 points a game. But he is shooting 42% from 3 right now. So he's picking it up right now. He's getting a bigger role in this Pistons team that is not having as good of a year as they had hoped they might. So maybe getting a little bit more opportunities because of that for him. And, we saw with Eric Paschall last year having a very successful rookie year, and now Saddiq Bey's having a great rookie year. So this is really good for Villanova basketball and Nova Nation in general. You know that recruits are taking notice and seeing that these guys are transitioning well into the NBA, and Saddiq's just the latest case of that. So he is our Cat in the Wild for this week.
Yeah, if you want to answer the question of is Villanova a 2-seed or better, Saddiq Bey, if he was on this team, that would be an easy question. But, man, he is doing great. That's an unbelievable start for him. Great Cat in the Wild there, Kev. Tom, when you think about some of the best players from Villanova and the guys that have gone to the NBA, we did the active 9 guys in the NBA and what teams they're on. Do you see a ceiling? And obviously guys are at different levels, but Kyle Lowry right at the end of his career. But a lot of these guys are young in the first 2 or 3 years. So do you see any guy that jumps out to you and say, hey, this is a perennial all-star versus, hey, he's going to be a role player? Who do you think really is set up for success among the 9 guys in the league?
Mikal Bridges. And I think that no question. I'll get back to Mikal in a second. I think Saddiq Kevin is exactly right. In a similar situation as Eric Paschall was last year out in Golden State, we will see how he progresses, as Detroit, hopefully for their sake, gets more pieces to their puzzle. But we've seen Eric take a bit more of a back seat this year, biding his time. So it's just all that to say, it's too early to tell for both Saddiq Bey and Eric Paschall. But Mikal Bridges, and I just think that entire Phoenix Suns organization is going to be a heck of a lot of fun to follow over the next 5 or so years. I think they are developing. I think you said Mikal Bridges, maybe a perennial all-star. I think so. I think that Phoenix Sun team could be a perennial Western Conference contender for the foreseeable future. They're fun to watch, and I think Mikal Bridges is going to. He's right now. He is Devin Booker's right-hand man. He is, the Robin to Devin Booker's Batman, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's got all the qualities that you want in an NBA player, right? I mean, he shoots the ball really well, so he's a great wingman for the Suns, and we remember from his days at Villanova, just an unbelievable defender, even back in his redshirt freshman days. You know, he's using those long, lanky arms. He's the guy down on the press, just a really impressive defender, and you hear it all the time in the NBA. You want a 3-and-D man, and he is the perfect guy for that. And I think Saddiq Bey fits right in there. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Mikal Bridges, so maybe his ceiling is a little bit lower. But I think that what you're seeing out of Saddiq right now, he's going to continue to build on. I think that he's going to continue to grow his role with the Pistons. I don't foresee Eric Paschall situation where he takes a back seat. There's really nobody on the Pistons right now that they're expecting back next year. I think that they're going to continue to grow as an organization, and I think a lot of that could be built around Saddiq Bey. So I'd say he's up there with Mikal, but I think those are the two guys who are really set up. You look at the rest of the guys, and Arch and Josh Hart's having a tough time right now. It seems like Jalen is up and down. And
Jalen,
he's been
baby,
injured a little bit.
So the NBA, again, not an expert on the NBA, don't really take a ton of time to watch it, but it does seem to me as if there are more. Let's just talk about his guy, Luka Doncic, right? He's running the point. LeBron James is running the point, right? James Harden handles the ball a ton. I would love for it to be a situation where he's the John Stockton, he's the Steve Nash. Though Steve Nash could certainly score
The Derek
as well.
Fisher. Jalen Brunson can easily play a Derek Fisher role.
Absolutely.
Steve Kerr, The Last Dance.
What?
Steve Kerr. Did you watch The Last Dance?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just never mind.
You think that's Jalen's role, like a spot
Steve
up
Kerr
shooter?
is a shooter.
He handles the ball. He was a point guard, and Michael Jordan handled the ball.
Are you sure about that?
No, he was a JJ Redick.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Shooting guard.
I don't know. That's not how I remember, but we'll agree to disagree.
Fair enough. Hey, you know what? We'll take that one offline. We'll take that one offline.
You can cut that.
Anyway, yeah. Derek Fisher.
I think so. Well, and one last thing is a guy we're not talking about who is on a title. They should be a title contender.
Yeah.
But I mean, he isn't putting up anything crazy offensively for the Bucks, but he's in the starting lineup every single night.
Yep.
Why? Because he's long, he's athletic, he plays defense, and he can go off any given night. He's capable of that, which is super valuable. And I think that just because he's not, lighting it up this year the way Mikal is, now that's because Dante has more seasoned weapons around him in Milwaukee than Mikal has right now in Phoenix. But I think Dante is a guy that still has a very, very bright future.
I like it. Good stuff. Good stuff on the Cat in the Wild. And with that said, we'll take it to our next and final segment of the night, and that is the Shootaround.
Welcome to the Shootaround, where we shout out anything related to Villanova basketball or not. And I will start this week's Shootaround by shouting out a fellow coach of mine at Cristo Rey Philadelphia High School, and that is our assistant athletic director and varsity boys basketball coach, Guy Moore. I don't know that he watches the show, but I'll have to get him watching and let him know about the shout out. But he has just been working so hard. He more than anybody, and his kids, and really all of our kids at our school. We didn't get to have fall sports. We didn't get to start winter sports as early as everybody else did. Kept been waiting very, very patiently. We're located in North Philadelphia, Cristo Rey Philadelphia High School. Our athletes have been waiting very, very patiently. So we're super excited for his boys basketball team to finally get on the court this past week and open up the season with two very decisive victories. And he's building quite the program. So Guy Moore, who's a Philadelphia Catholic League name, went to Roman, has coached at North Catholic and at West, and is just an all-around great guy, and excited that he's finally getting to be out there with the guys coaching again.
How recently was he at West?
That's a good question. I think he was at North more recent than West.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, so North.
At
So that's
North,
been a
I
while.
believe at North when we were in high school.
Interesting. Yeah, right before, unfortunately,
I
shut down.
believe that I would have been to like a LaSalle playoff game in 2011, maybe 2010 or 2011, to see them play North in a PCL playoff game.
Guy Moore getting a shout out here before you go, though, Tom. Do you guys have a live stream? Can folks check out Guy's work out there on the floor?
That's right. There is a live stream here. Let me pull that up and then maybe we can get that in before the end of the show. But there's a live stream linked up. I think an organization in Philadelphia is helping a lot of schools get the live streams up because it's a mandatory thing.
Yeah.
It's actually mandatory if you're going to have sports. You have to have it streamed live. So that was one of the stipulations to bring back high school sports. So we'll get that. We'll get that for the Bob Long sports community.
Awesome. All right, Kev, you're up.
All right, my shout out this week is the West Coast Conference. So in this year of unprecedented, everything, trying to come up with new ways of doing things, and the West Coast Conference is doing just that. You look at the college basketball landscape this year, you have a lot of teams that don't have as many games as other teams because of if they've had a COVID issue within their team, they had to miss a couple of weeks, like Villanova. You have to come up with a way to adjust your conference standing. So you look at Villanova, and if they've missed a couple of games against better teams versus maybe some of those lower tier teams, you'd want your conference record to be adjusted accordingly, maybe strength of schedule. So the West Coast Conference, for their men's and women's tournament seeding, have partnered with Ken Pomeroy to seed each of their teams within their tournament using Ken Pom winning percentage. So a really innovative idea, something that probably would never be done or really even needed if it wasn't for a year like this. But kudos to the West Coast Conference for coming up with something creative and doing something interesting in this year.
Wow, putting that independence of the Ken Pom rankings to the test with some big time implications. Of course, Ken Pom would never take any bribe or otherwise, but that is really cool. Very, very unique.
Well, if Gonzaga is not number one, he may have been given some money.
That's a great one. My shout out tonight is to friend of the show, Mark Farzetta, and he is a guy who's gone through a lot in the past year. He, most recently with us, hopped on as a color commentator for a LaSalle football game, not this past season due to COVID, but the season before. And he's been on the show for a few interviews in the past. Unfortunately, 97.5 made the decision to move on from him in the morning show, brought up John Kincaid from Atlanta. And Mark, always the creative guy, found out a way to move forward, took on his own sponsors, and now is doing a 6 to 7 a.m. morning YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and then an iTunes, Apple Podcast show. It's called The Farzy Show. Check it out. Mark Farzetta does a great job. It's now become a part of my early morning. So I give Mark Farzetta, our good friend of the show, all the credit in the world for embarking on a new mission. And just like we talked about, call it a month ago now, about digital platforms for college sporting events, just like we're talking about now with Cristo Rey and the rest of high schools going the digital streaming route. Digital is where it's at. Listen, it's where Bob Long Sports has been living for the past 10 years, and we've carved out a nice little niche for ourselves. Mark showing that he can take that to the big time, and I wish him the best as he embarks upon his new endeavor. That's the Farzy Show every morning from 6 to 7. Great work, Mark, and we'll be continuing to listen and watch.
That's great to hear, Bob. I mean, Mark Farzetta, I enjoy listening to 97.5 in the morning, so my preference is to choose that over 94.1, and Mark Farzetta was a big reason for that. And I was certainly disappointed to see that they had let him go when they did. And, I think that he, was really the spark on that show. And I'd be more so inclined to listen to his podcast or his stream before I would even listen to 97.5 again. So I'm glad you shared that. I'll be tuning in.
It's manageable too, Kev. It's an hour You know, you get up in the morning, you're getting ready, or you're reading email in the first part of the morning. It's really manageable. He hits things quick. He has a great guest every day. It's a nice format. It's kind of like this, actually. You're not sitting through a 4-hour show here, a nice 45-minute guy, and then you're on your way. So enjoyed the time here as always. Big weekend for Villanova. We highlighted the importance of that UConn game. First time back in the Big East that Villanova is going to take on UConn, and it is big. If they want to win themselves another Big East regular season title, yes, the penultimate game of the regular season against Creighton, that'll be huge, but this weekend against UConn, also a big one. For Tom Trainer, Kevin Long, I am Bob Long saying so long here from our North Wales studios, as well as people patching in from Havertown and New Jersey. Enjoyed the time, guys. Enjoy the Villanova hoops, and we'll see you next week.